Let's kick off this explainer by looking at a tiny, incredibly niche liberal arts college down in Florida that practically overnight became the dead center of a massive national political battlefield. In 2023, the New College of Florida, a public school known for its very distinct progressive culture, was aggressively and completely overhauled by the state government. But look, this isn't just a story about one specific school or one specific politician. We're going to use this event as our entry point to unpack a much larger global phenomenon. We're talking about the political economy of institutional capture. Now, you might be wondering, and it's a completely valid question, why in the world would anyone spend so much political energy and capital on a tiny public college with only a few hundred kids? Well, the answer is absolutely fascinating. It's because institutions aren't just brick-and-mortar buildings. They are the literal engines of society. They reproduce ideas, they shape careers, they confer status, and ultimately, they determine legitimacy. If you want to change a culture, you don't just argue with people on the internet, right? You take over the actual machinery that produces that culture. So to really understand how this works, we're going to walk through exactly why small institutions matter, break down the step-by-step takeover playbook, and see how public funding is used as leverage. Then we'll dive into why education is historically such a battleground, figure out when normal reform crosses the line into capture, and finally look at what it actually takes to build healthy, accountable institutions. Okay, let's jump into why these smaller institutions matter so much as gatekeepers. We'll start at the micro level with the New College of Florida itself. Historically, this was a famously quirky place. Students focused on independent study, they didn't really do traditional grades. Honestly, it was so niche that the student body once literally chose an empty math bracket, the null set, as their official mascot. But I want you to notice the massive difference between the physical target and the ideological prize here. On one side, you just have a school with about 300 students, a deeply self-directed curriculum, and a famously LGBTQ-friendly environment. That's the target. But the prize? The prize is symbolic proof that a political movement can successfully step in and forcefully govern culture. So the crucial point to take away is that a small college becomes a massive symbolic trophy. It signals values to the rest of the country, proving that institutional structures can actually be reoriented. And this brilliantly illustrates a global pattern we see all over the world. Institutions hold incredible power. They shape the senior civil service, they shape the courts, they control cultural narratives, and they gatekeep adult careers. For example, let's look at South Korea. Over there, a tiny fraction of top universities, collectively known as SKY, essentially gatekeep all adult outcomes. Graduates from those few specific schools run the table on the civil service, the courts, and the media. It's simple. If you control the institution, you control the pipeline of elite talent and societal reality. And the shift in Florida wasn't some kind of accident. It was a highly intentional strategy. The conservative activist Chris Rufo stated the intent incredibly clearly, noting that they wanted to, quote, retake an institution to create a model for red state governors all over the country. This is exactly why this is such a perfect case study. It was explicitly, openly designed to be a blueprint for state power. Which leads us right into the mechanics of how this is done. Let's look at the actual takeover playbook. What we have here is the exact checklist used to overhaul the college. Think of it as a step-by-step manual for institutional capture. Step 1, the governor appoints a block of political allies straight to the Board of Trustees. Step 2, those allies immediately change the leadership, bringing in a former politician as the new president. Step 3, they attack the old culture, entirely purging certain academic programs. And finally, step 4, they completely rebrand the institution's core identity. You can really see the sheer mechanics of this ideological tug-of-war in practice. The new leadership immediately abolished the gender studies program, which, by the way, only had a tiny $7,000 budget to begin with, and they completely emptied out the Student Diversity Center. Then came the rebrand. They shifted to a classical liberal arts model, they changed that quirky null set mascot to a muscular banyan tree, and, get this, they recruited 70 baseball players to a school that didn't even have a baseball field or a college athletics program. Why? They explicitly stated it was to rebalance the demographics of a campus that historically leaned female. But how do you actually pay for a pivot that massive? Well, that brings us to public funding as leverage. Public institutions are uniquely vulnerable because state funding is basically a giant valve. And that valve can be turned for democratic accountability, sure, but it can also be turned for ideological control. The financial fallout of this rapid overhaul is just staggering. A state audit found that during this takeover, the public cost to produce a single degree at New College absolutely ballooned to nearly $500,000. That spending dwarfed the per-student cost at any other average state school in Florida. So where did all that money go? It was driven in large part by massive administrative costs. We're talking heavily subsidized merit scholarships for those new athletes and a wildly lucrative compensation package for the new politically appointed president worth over $1 million a year. It's a stark reality. When the state holds the purse strings, they can inject massive amounts of capital to forcefully reshape an institution from the inside out. And this highlights exactly why education is constantly a battleground. Universities aren't just places to take exams. They are symbolic arenas where we fight over history, merit, and national identity. To really grasp this, we need to zoom out historically. Let's rewind to the 18th century. The Habsburg Empire deliberately used educational underdevelopment in Hungary as a massive tool of state control. They mandated that Latin be the official language of administration. Now, regular working-class Hungarians couldn't afford to go learn Latin, which meant they were entirely locked out of the state bureaucracy. It was a calculated, deliberate tool to depoliticize the public. Fast forward to 2023, and we see modern states defunding specific academic programs to remove ideas they oppose from the public sphere. The tactics might evolve, but the strategy of using education to consolidate state power, that remains exactly the same. Which brings us to a really critical threshold. When does reform become capture? We have to seriously ask ourselves, at what point does legitimate, everyday democratic oversight cross the line into a total, hostile, institutional takeover? Well, the real-world consequence of treating a school as a political trophy is pretty grim. Just months into the takeover at New College, over a third of the faculty, more than 33%, either left or took leave. Imagine that, an absolute mass exodus of institutional knowledge. The result? Returning students were left completely scrambling just to find classes and professors for their majors, deeply destabilizing their entire educational experience. A marine biology student from the college summarized the feeling perfectly, saying it felt like a political playground. Because that's the human cost here, a total collapse of trust. When an institution becomes the spoils of war for the winning political faction, its primary mission is basically destroyed. The students and the faculty are just sidelined so the politicians can put on national political theater. So how do we fix it? How do we ensure healthy and accountable institutions? How do we build public systems that actually serve everyday people rather than just functioning as tools for whatever political faction happens to be in charge? I want you to consider this ancient Athenian practice called euthuna. Back in their system of lottery-based democracy, they used strict public audits, but they were conducted by ordinary, randomly selected citizens to examine an official's integrity. It wasn't about elite politicians policing other elite politicians. It was about ordinary citizens holding power accountable. This kind of socialization of accountability is exactly what prevents the deep polarization, factionalism, and elite cartel behavior that completely ruins modern institutions. Drawing from that history, what does a healthy institution actually require today? Well, it needs pluralism and cognitive diversity, meaning a genuine variety of thought, not just an echo chamber dictated by the ruling party. It absolutely requires professional standards over political patronage. It needs democratic oversight that doesn't just evolve into passing out partisan spoils. And crucially, it requires unrestricted academic freedom and total transparency. These pillars are what ensure that the institutions impacting your daily life, whether that's the schools in your neighborhood or the courts deciding your basic rights, actually represent collective wisdom, completely divorced from elite political maneuvering. I'm going to leave you with this final provocative thought. Movements that cannot win the culture directly almost always try to control the institutions that shape it. Universities, courts, civil service, museums, media, you name it. The fight over institutions is ultimately a fight over truth itself. And if we don't actively protect them from capture, if we let every institution simply become a shiny trophy for the winning side, well, we lose our shared reality entirely. Thanks for hanging out with me for this explainer. I really hope it gave you a new lens to view the world around you.